The book Ysabel by one of my favorite authors, Gavriel Kay, was pretty much the perfect sort of book to pick up after finishing reading Eating the Sun, which was a very detailed scientific look at photosynthesis. It was a nice, easy, breezy fantasy novel, but it wasn't without at least one major issue. Ysabel is a fantasy novel that is set in modern-day France, or at least modern day when it was written in 2007. It's pretty funny how quickly cultural references and technologies go out of date these days. I mean, talking about iPads and Alanis Morissette.
You shut your mouth, fool! Alanis Morissette is timeless!
God? Is that you? Anyways, it's a modern day setting, but the characters come into contact with characters from the distant past, as well as some godlike figures and creatures, and a whole melding of this history/fantasy world that is mixing with the modern world. In that manner, it's similar to a lot of Guy Kay's books in that he takes kind of a historical fiction setting and kind of puts this whole fantasy veneer over top of everything. That allows Guy Kay to both play with the history but also inject this fun fantasy stuff into there as well. And the reading is pretty light and easy. I would put it at probably a young adult level. And the author makes a couple of sort of cute references here. At one point, he's describing one of the English characters, and he says, Lee was in his 60s, tall, rumpled, and stooped, with pale, pouchy eyes, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and long, not very disciplined silver hair that scattered in various directions and gave him a startled look. Every so often, he'd run a hand through it, a mostly negative effect. He wore a jacket and a diagonally striped tie and smoked a pipe. There were ashes on his tie and jacket. It was almost as if he'd been cast as a British author. And then later on, there's this scene. But he saw the impact on the druid. The man actually grew pale, color leaching from his face. Ned had thought that only happened in stories, but he could see it in Bryce. So there's a few slightly self-referential statements of, oh, I thought this only happened in books, or I thought these characters were only happened in fictional stories, and yet here we are in real life. Which I guess could be interpreted as amusing or interpreted as lazy writing, depending on how you decide to see it. So after the dense scientific nonfiction of the previous book, this was a nice, easy read. I blasted through it pretty quickly. And ran into a thing towards the end of the book here. So partway into the book, a 25-year-old character makes a sexual innuendo towards the 15-year-old main character. And I was like, okay, that's not cool. But then, right near the end of the book, this 25-year-old character is making full-on sexual advances to the 15-year-old, trying to get the character to sleep with the 25-year-old. And I was like, what is going on here? This is horrible. Nothing about this is appropriate, especially since the story isn't couching it as something inappropriate and disgusting, but is rather playing it off as something kind of sexy, I guess, which just makes it that much worse. And I don't know if the author thought he could get away with it because the 15-year-old is a boy and the 25-year-old is a woman, because, I don't know, you take the same situation, you make the main character a 15-year-old girl and have a 25-year-old man trying to sleep with her. I don't know why that should be more gross, but maybe that's the thinking there. I'm not exactly sure. And it's all the more puzzling considering another character the same age as the 15-year-old main character was brought into the story right from the beginning and seems to be getting set up to be the sort of second main character of the book, and probably a summer romantic fling with the main character. That was definitely being heavily teased. And yet, disappointingly, about maybe 2/3 of the way into the book, maybe 3/4 of the way, I'm not sure, that secondary character who had come in, this other roughly 15-year-old girl, was almost sort of dropped out of it and relegated to secondary or tertiary character status, which was disappointing in and of itself because I liked the character. I thought that her and the main character meshed well together and were an interesting duo. But then she's kind of tossed aside, and it's the 25-year-old who's now coming on to the 15-year-old and making me all uncomfortable. And so I don't think there was any reason to even go that route when there was this other more age-appropriate romance that was in the works and then was oddly sort of dropped at some point. And it really kind of spoiled the book for me, unfortunately. Now, I do really enjoy Guy Kay as an author. I mean, his 3-part trilogy, the Fiona of Our Tapestry here, is straight up the best high fantasy I've ever written. I wish I'd written it. Straight up the best high fantasy I've ever read. And it actually takes the same approach as Ysabel takes, which is that it starts off in a modern setting and then the kind of old-timey and magical fantasy world kind of comes crashing into that. But I love the Fiona of Our Tapestry. And the 2-part Serentine mosaic here is straight up some of the best fiction I've ever read, let alone fantasy fiction. Absolutely love these books. So it's not like I have any issues with Guy Kay as an author. I think in this particular instance, I'm just puzzled as to why he's written his story this way. It could have been an easy recommend as a young adult, sort of fun fantasy fiction, easy reading type of feel-good novel, but instead I'm like, no, not cool. So I'm going to leave behind Ysabel now and move on to something else. When I finish my next book, as always, I'll come and tell you about it. And in the meantime, tell me what you're reading. I'm always eager to discuss books in general. The preceding video has been brought to you free of charge by me, Josh. The only thing I ask in return is that you could do one of the following. Give me a thumb up, push the subscribe button, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Cheers. In that way, it is much like a lot of Guy Kay's books, where in that manner, it's a lot like... In that manner, it's similar... It was always... Depending on how you decide to have a... and then I'm always eager to hear about books in general. I'm always eager to hear about books in general. I'm always eager to hear about books in general.